I'm back with Brihat again on our Stream of Bhakti channel. We're getting into further into this chapter, Lord Krishna's entrance into Dwarka of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Um, how are you doing, Brihat?
I am happy to be here. I'm here because, uh, well, I won't get into I've been reading some books, and this guy who's saying one of his basic principles of life. He has a whole uh, communication system he's developed, but the basic principle is communicating in such a way that um, what will make life more wonderful for you and for me. And like he has a whole system of communication based on clearly communicating with each other, like what's going to enrich life. So I've been trying to apply that principle in my own life, like asking myself, what I'm doing, is this enriching my life? So that's why I'm here every Sunday morning, because I find this very enriching.
Nice. Yeah, I do too. That's a really interesting concept to meditate on. So every communication in that moment, I'm like conscious and deciding, is this enriching my life or not?
Yeah, and also being able to clearly communicate with others what would be enriching, like what they can do that would enrich your life. Because another basic principle is that human beings actually, by nature, we want to contribute to the welfare of others, of society in general. And so based on those things, he's created this whole system of communication. It's called NVC, nonviolent communication. It's really
Hmm.
it's communication, but it's the principles that it's based on, I find, are quite rich and deep.
Hmm. So if I'm like driving my car on the highway in the midst of like a some kind of traffic jam, or and somebody's not cooperating with me, or if I'm getting impatient, I'm thinking, am I going to enrich my life now by honking on my horn
Hey,
and
that's right. That's
screaming
right.
some profanities?
That's right. He actually, that's an example. He talks about, like, he said, we've basically been educated to think that if we scream profanities at other people, the result we'll get is that people will feel, oh, I've done something wrong, and repent for that. So, but he said it's never seemed to work that way for him. So,
It just doesn't work. Doesn't work. It doesn't enrich my life somehow. Yeah, we were when my friend. This is okay. We won't stay on this too much longer. But like when I was a teenager, my friend was driving a convertible,
Okay,
and
okay.
he had his girlfriend in the car, and a teenager driving a convertible on a summer day, with his girlfriend there, and he was feeling pretty good about life. But he was kind of like a reckless driver a little bit, and
Okay,
so
okay.
he ended getting into it with somebody on the road, and cut him off or something like that. And then they had some kind of gestures back and forth or whatever. And then they came to a stoplight, and the guy actually got out of his car, walked up and reached in to the convertible and just punched him. And then got back into his car and drove away. And my friend said it just wrecked his whole day.
I believe it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's not a great story, but it just goes to show how it doesn't add up, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah. It goes to show how our methods of communication often, they don't produce the result that we were intending.
yeah, yeah.
And so that's what this guy's whole thing is about. We're trying to meet some needs. We're trying to like get a certain result, and the way we've been taught to communicate often, uh, the result is quite different.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But all that to say is that I'm here because I find these discussions personally quite enriching, and it's nice to share that with you.
Yeah, me too. I really appreciate them too. Thank you so much. Let's dive into it. Let's get into this. Like we sometimes go through this at a different pace. Like if there's a storyline that we're into, sometimes we move quite quickly through the chapters.
Right, right.
So I'm glad that you agreed to go through this chapter, because there's not like a huge storyline, but there's some pretty intense philosophical stuff going on here, and it's hard to go quickly through each text. Just to recap a little bit, we were talking about how um, Krishna is leaving. Where was he leaving? Hastinapur,
Yeah.
the city that was now, which is largely believed to be today's Delhi. And at that time, it was the capital of the Pandavas, and Krishna was there visiting, but he was leaving. And so the previous chapter was the whole feelings of separation that they were feeling as he was leaving. And so this chapter is like flipping it. And now he's coming back to a community, another large center filled with people who were already feeling that separation and are completely excited that he's now entering into this town of Dwarka, the city of Dwarka. We've been reading about how different personalities have come out to greet him, all kinds of different everyone you can think of in society dropped whatever they were doing, everything from the most his closest family to the most highly respected, to the less prominently situated in society, like everybody, and they just kind of dropped whatever they were doing and is coming to see, because Krishna blew his conch before entering the city to announce his presence in their own. So now their hearts are filled with joy. Now he's already entered the city, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just you were saying that the previous chapter was the feelings of separation from Krishna, and now this chapter is the feelings of meeting with Krishna after that separation. So yeah, it's quite interesting.
Yeah, it's a nice way that they're paired together, these two chapters. So and it is also because the whole Bhagavatam itself is to help us understand a very like a very important point in bhakti, how our relationship, the relationship that the soul has with divinity is really a choice. We could say, like, as souls, we have a choice how we want to relate with the divine. It's not really a choice whether or not we're divine or not.
Right.
We are spiritual beings according to the teachings of the Bhagavatam and all of the Bhakti teachings, and according to, if we were to analyze it, maybe our experience too.
Right.
Where given that fact that we're spiritual entities, we still have the kind of choice how we want to relate to the Supreme. And so that opens up the subject of yoga. Yoga at its depth is really the topic of the soul connecting with divinity. And each yoga process kind of like focuses on a particular kind of relationship that we have with the divine. So there is any thoughts about this so far?
Just that I think it's not just that it's like this has depth of a lot of philosophical depth, this chapter, but it also that relationship with the divine. It's also a very rich emotional experience, and that also really comes out in the Bhagavatam. What is the emotional experience actually in that relationship with the divine? And you can see that the descriptions in different places are quite fantastic in terms of what we are actually able to experience, how much happiness, how much not just happiness, but also the flip side of that, the sadness, the emotions are very um, uh, pronounced, I guess, very, very amazing.
Absolutely. That's a great way to put it. Like we can have, in fact, this is a great um, point to stress in terms of understanding the relationship that's emphasized in bhakti, because like when I put on music, for example, like music has always been something that's been important to me. It makes me feel a certain way. Like I'll get a sense of, and it invokes emotion.
Right, right,
Yeah. And it also invokes other things, not just emotion. Like it invokes a certain state of mind, a certain state of satisfaction in my mind,
right,
and it can regulate me in a certain way. But but when I listen to music that really moves me, that's the most enjoyable, let's say.
right, right,
But that emotion that I experience listening to music is not the same as is not the same as the emotion that I experience when I'm experiencing that emotion with another person.
right, right, right,
So when I'm having an emotional exchange with somebody, it's a whole different level.
right, right,
It's not just a one way thing. Like I'm listening to this music and and emotions are being evoked, but now I'm having an emotional experience and I'm expressing those emotions to another, and that other is understanding those emotions and reciprocating with me on that emotional level.
right, right.
And we're going through an emotional experience together where there's an exchange of back and forth. So that experience of emotion is different than what I experience when I'm listening to music by myself. See where I'm going with this?
I keep going, keep going.
All right. So depending on what I'm interested in, I'm going to choose that particular activity. And so yoga is very much like that. We don't have to have an emotional relationship with the divine,
Right,
like
yeah,
what's being described here, where like with the personification of divinity, Krishna, where Krishna is understanding the emotions, and that's what this chapter is about. Actually, he's reciprocating exactly to like that those feelings with all the individuals that are there, and investing in that relationship and enriching that relationship more. There's also other which is the goal of bhakti, but there are other paths of yoga that uh, do not strive for such a personal goal.
right. They actually they actually strive to remove all, like there are many spiritual philosophical paths and yoga paths that at the end there's only one thing going on, one person, not even person necessarily, but just a oneness. And so there's no longer any emotional exchange.
In terms of exchange, yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
there's no because there's no meaning. Exchange means two. So these other paths, there's no exchange anymore, which is actually like it in the Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada brings out this point that, and Krishna brings out this point that people are attracted to that actually because in our experience in this life, we have had experience of exchange with other people, and it's only been either hurt us a lot or it's just been dissatisfying. And so the conclusion can be, well, exchange between personalities doesn't work, so the spiritual must mean that there's none of that. But bhakti is about, actually, yes, those exchanges do work, but they're on the spiritual platform. Those exchanges are purified to the point that, yeah, it is possible to have those pure loving exchanges that are completely satisfying to the heart. And that happens in relation with the Supreme, who is mentions that he's able to perfectly reciprocate with every living being. This is the difference between the soul and the super soul. That
Yeah.
yeah, he's able to reciprocate perfectly with every living being.
And let's just say that, let's just say that I think you're right that part of the reason why a person might hesitate to deal with to embrace the idea of personality in divinity is this idea, like you're saying, how we've struggled with personality. We struggle with personalities enough already.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's like, why, try to think of something different, something that's not related to those kind of
Yeah.
struggles. So, but there's another blockage as well, is that um, it also might be hard for the rational mind to put all these pieces together, like how it's possible that a personality could be behind all of reality.
Right.
And some of the other yoga paths, for example, are speaking more strongly to the rational mind
Right. Right.
than to the emotional mind, you could say. But again, there's a limitation there, though, because whatever the absolute truth is, or whatever divine reality might be, I don't think that anybody would expect to capture it entirely with the power of human rationality.
Yeah. That's exactly the point. Yeah. And that is, I think there would be many, well, many, but there would be people that would disagree with that. And they do actually try to capture the absolute truth with the power of their intelligence. And that, well, if you read the Vedic literature, it says if you take that path, you'll never capture the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the great teachers in Bhakti, he said basically the prerequisite for entering into transcendence, going beyond the material, going beyond the power of intellect, is that we have to accept that the spiritual reality is inconceivable to the material mind and intelligence. It can be understood, but the process is different. It doesn't, the process is not by human rationality, by human intellect. Actually, the process is bhakti. And the truths are revelation, as opposed to, like rational thinking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, this is like really interesting. And uh so also, like, rational, let's stick with this theme of digging into rationality for a minute, because it's
Okay.
important. Like what we're reading here is challenging, right, in terms
Yes.
of everyday rationality. So um rationality is also, maybe especially in the Western mindset, given perhaps more weight than it deserves.
Right. Right.
Like in one sense, in our Western cultures, it seems to me that rationality is kind of the last gate, the last kind of doorkeeper. That if it doesn't get through if it doesn't pass through some form of rationality, then we can't actually accept it as
Truth.
something that's truth or valid. Yeah. But rationality isn't the only way to verify truth.
Mm.
But it's in the Western culture, especially since the age of enlightenment, so to speak. The age of enlightenment in Western society is attributed to, the birth of science, and that's literally called the age of enlightenment historically,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
And which is quite contrary to the concepts of enlightenment in the yoga texts. Like Basically, the Age of Enlightenment you know, in Western terms, is a full-on investment in rationality and being able to like buying in entirely to the idea that the world can be completely understood through sense perception, and it can be measured
Right,
in some
right,
way.
right.
And so, but there are other faculties we have as living entities that can verify truth other than rationality. Um, so at least so like emotionally, for example, like what we were just talking about, my point here is that even if some of this stuff doesn't make rational sense, it's not really it's not really as pivotal in bhakti that it has to in order to continue on the path. We may come across things in the teachings that don't seem rational to us, or may not seem easy to grasp, or like philosophically or intellectually. But there's plenty of other things in bhakti other than intellectual experience. So if we're not
Right.
feeling totally like satisfied at the moment with something intellectually or rationally, we can simply just go on and focus on the experiences of bhakti that we are getting satisfaction, which is perhaps the emotional or spiritual experience from the practices,
Right.
the realizations, or the different ways that bhakti helps us see the world, and things that may not be triggering our intellect directly. Like, it's just rich. There's just more.
Right.
There's more than intellect going on.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. Like
Yeah.
in terms of the human experience,
Yeah.
um, there's a lot more going on than just rationality. Like
Yes.
there's an emotional experience also. There's a, you know, there's a physical there's different things, and bhakti touches on all of them.
Yes.
And so even if it's not satisfying the intellectual experience, something may not be, then it may it definitely it's touching all those things, so you may feel
Yeah.
very satisfied in another way. And it's very,
Exactly.
yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's a good point.
So, but that's not to say that the philosophy is not very satisfying
Yeah.
intellectually. It's just that it may not be the moment. Like, it may take some time for things to add up, so that we can put like, you know, if we are intellectually inclined. If we're not, it may just be something like, well, I don't care, whatever. I'm just, everything else is good.
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but like, if somebody is really intellectually inclined, then some patience is needed. Like, basically, what this whole Bhagavatam is trying to do is trying to establish a link between the spiritual being and divinity as a personal reality. And to do that, there's like 12 cantos.
Right, right,
There's like, you know, 18,000 Sanskrit verses.
right. Hmm.
And so it's not like, you know, it takes some time to get through to connect all the dots. And sometimes, like, the dots don't all seem to be connecting, but in time they do
Yeah.
in
And
bhakti.
I have a personal experience of that.
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember this, but I remember when I was first reading the Bhagavad Gita,
Uh-huh.
um, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that there's, in the ninth chapter, he's describing how he's in everything. He's in everything. He pervades everything. And then the next verse, the next text, he says, and yet I'm not in everything. It's like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
Hmm.
And that actually, you know, that actually like really got my intellectual mind. I was like, oh no, I like, this doesn't make sense. You know, I found a flaw. I
Right.
found a flaw. Um, and sorry. Um, but as I practice bhakti, actually it makes perfect sense. I won't go into the whole thing right now, but I think the principle there is that um, we have a tendency in the West to want to be to think that our intellect is supreme. And if we're supreme, then, we can control and we can enjoy the world. But the fact is that we're not.
Yeah.
We're not. And so, yeah, sometimes there are things that intellectually they don't add up, but anyway, I haven't found, as I practice bhakti, it actually is very intellectually rich and stimulating. Instead of trying to prove the things wrong, if you approach the bhakti text with the mood that, okay, I may not understand this, but you try to understand what it's saying, not that you dismiss it, but you try. It's so intellectually rich and stimulating. Like, personally, I find it so intellectually rich and stimulating that, like, no other philosophy is as satisfying as the bhakti philosophy, in my experience.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's incredibly deep.
Yeah.
And as we go deeper into the tradition, we find that great, powerful intellectuals have also
Yeah.
been greatly satisfied. What to speak of me and my puny mind?
Yeah.
Like I can barely read, but there are like great, powerful intellectuals in our tradition were just, their minds were so amazing, and they found such great satisfaction
Yeah.
in these teachings, and then therefore they're ancient. They keep on being relished age after age.
Right.
They're just so amazing.
Right. Shall
I'm
we
looking.
begin?
Yeah. I was looking for this verse in the Bhagavatam just to finish this point, which was Paramatma, like that verse in the Bhagavatam that describes Bhagavan, Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan.
Yes.
Do you remember the verse number?
It's in the second chapter, like first canto, second chapter.
How does that verse start?
Brahmeti Paramatmeti
That's the
Bhagavaniti Shabdite. It's maybe like, it's past 10, I think, but it's between 10 and 20, I believe.
2:11. Good one. One sec. I'm going to read this. Like, it's a verse that's very important, and I've used it many, many times. In fact, I refer to it quite frequently, but I just don't have a knack for memorizing Sanskrit, unfortunately. Yes. So it's verse 11 of the second chapter in the first canto. Vadanti tadva vidas tadvam yaj jnanam advayam brahmati paramatmati bhagavaniti sabdite. So translation is, learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. So learned transcendentalists referring to those on the path of yoga, that's what's being referred to here, who know the absolute truth. So learned transcendent, this is some measure of success going on here for these yogis in different kind of yogic paths. They call this non-dual substance Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, and they do so according to the yoga path that they've followed. So a jnana yogi would refer to the absolute as Brahman, and this is like the understanding of like a pervasive light,
Right.
that energy, let's say, that runs through everything. And jnana yoga leads one to eventual realization of this reality, how we're all somehow connected to a spiritual energy. Then the Ashtanga yogis, they are pursuing Paramatma ultimately, like, because yoga is such where yoga becomes quite mystic beyond just the asana and the pranayam and like when the meditation becomes deep and the awareness becomes very, very concentrated, and the bodily conception, the idea that I'm this body, becomes obliviated through the practice of yoga, right? And then they're able to go deeper within and eventually discover the Paramatma who is residing within the heart. This is actual Ashtanga yoga, where
Right.
they um, so this is how would you describe Paramatma?
Paramatma. Well, Paramatma is the Brahman. The thing is, they're the same thing, but they're just it's the same absolute substance, but perceived differently. So Brahman is pervading everything. Everything's base, like it's the basis of everything, pervading everything. Whereas this is the same with Paramatma, except that the Paramatma is not just a impersonal substance, it's actually a localized like personality that is within every atom and within every living being's heart. This is, I think, this is when it enters into starts to enter into the realm of personality. That the absolute is actually the source of everything is actually a person.
And that Paramatma kind of like can be detected as well, let's say a voice within,
Right,
or
right.
like urgings within. Maybe we won't put a voice to it. It doesn't have to be articulated words, but some kind of inner understanding that pushes us towards um higher like consciousness, like impels us to do the right thing
Yeah,
spiritually.
an inner guide. But
Yes.
even in the Bhagavatam, the Paramatma is even for those who are wanting other things. He's giving the intelligence to accomplish anything, whatever your
Yes.
desires. So
That's right. That's right.
if you have a spiritual desire, that voice is guiding you in that way. But if you have another
Yeah.
desire, that voice will guide you. And so,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
And so sometimes we look at life and we see how it seems miraculous how, like, even if we're not thinking spiritually, like you're saying, we just look at maybe things we've achieved. Oh, if it hadn't happened like that, it wouldn't have happened like this, and
mm-hmm.
things just all fell in place a certain way. A yogi eventually understands how there's another energy or personality who's involved in making those arrangements. It's not all
Right,
happening by our own strength. It's not we're not the
yes,
big geniuses that are making things
right,
happen well for us, or right.
right, exactly. There's more involved.
Yeah. So yoga is a way, especially Ashtanga yoga is a way to kind of like settle the mind away from all the external activity in this world and focus in on what exactly is that. And so Ashtanga yoga is like constant pursuance of this Paramatma,
Yeah,
like trying to figure out. Of course, it's a path that's a lot. Both these first ones, Brahma. I mean, like the Brahman and Paramatma. They're kind of like they deal with hardcore renunciation,
right.
where Bhakti it starts to become not so much like that. I mean, there is renunciation in Bhakti too. So that brings us to Bhagavan, which is where there's the personal relationship with the divine. So
Yeah, and this is in yoga. They actually, by their meditation, they actually meet the personality. But you have, at that point, they have a choice whether they are going to engage in a relationship with that personality or if they're just gonna like there's a one level where it's just an appreciation. It's just an appreciation. Wow, like here's the source of everything. Wow, just
mhm.
kind of like an amazement, um, an eternal amazement. Whereas in the first, the jnana, there's no relationship and there's no understanding of personality. There's just an understanding that I'm eternal. There's an eternal substance, and I'm not a temporary um um uh I don't have a temporary existence. I have an eternal existence, but it doesn't go beyond that.
Yeah. And then in either case, with Brahman or Paramatma, it's kind of like the equivalent to my example of turning on some some really awesome music, right? I mean, like in a minuscule way, listening to
Yeah,
music.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
if
yeah.
you were to be a perfected yogi in either the Brahman or Paramatma path, either Jnana Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga, it's like, it's way beyond turning on like some awesome music. It's like
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
complete absorption. There's like form that it's like samadhi.
yeah, yeah.
There is samadhi or deep absorption in the divine, in the perfected stages of these paths. And so in this verse that we were reading from the Bhagavatam, whether it's Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan, which is Bhakti, they're all learned transcendentalists.
Yeah, right.
They're all spiritual. They're all situated on the path of yoga. So, but just as we did like a little brief description of what is Brahman, what is Paramatma, what is Bhagavan, that's the Srimad Bhagavatam, 12 cantos. So
Right,
the idea is
right.
that it's not just energy or light. It's not just a localized guide in the heart or energy within the heart, or Paramatma
Also,
is not. Yep.
yeah, Paramama also, like the yogis, they understand that this person that they meet, he is the origin of the whole world in which we live. But they haven't realized that that personality has his own existence, his own life, his own place. So the first two conceptions really still, they're only aware of the material existence. They're not really aware of the spiritual reality.
Would you call it a material existence though? Like would you say that it's that Brahman that the Brahman is some form of material existence, or the Paramatma?
Uh, it's just the no, it's not. But the way that we reciprocate with those understandings, it doesn't enter into the spiritual reality. I it might this might be a little abstract.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't get us into the what you just said, like how not only does so we wouldn't expect, if there's energy, what does energy do? Energy is all pervasive, like the Brahman, right? And so the Paramatma, the super soul, it's described as um, the guide within the heart,
Right,
and how it's also all pervasive, but in a slightly different way. It's more personalized,
right,
but its role is clearly described. The super soul sanctions what like our desires in our heart, and helps us achieve, ultimately wants to guide us towards spiritual realization. But Bhagavan, like when we're talking about Krishna, the personal form, the personality, not just the super soul, but like how that how Krishna has a personality. Well, a personality, implies thought. It
right,
implies activity.
right,
It implies feelings. It implies everything a person experiences. You and I and everybody experience personality, and that personality has an individual aspect to it where we, engage with others, and so in order for that, there must be, like so there is a spiritual realm where Krishna does, exchange uh all of these, engages in activity.
right.
And that world is not, knowledge of that world is not achieved through the Brahman and Paramatma, the more
Those
impersonal
paths of, yeah,
understandings. Yeah, yeah.
those paths of yoga. And I've heard it explained that those concepts of the absolute, they are true,
Hmm.
but they're simply to help us get out of the
Yeah.
material existence. But they don't bring you into, they get you out of the material existence, but there's a place between there and the spiritual existence.
Yeah, yeah. They
So they don't bring you all the way to the spiritual existence, but they get you out of the material.
yeah, it's like relating to the divine, but at the same time having some, it's an incomplete, perhaps not a complete understanding
Yeah, yeah,
of all that is manifest in the divine.
yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But still, whether or not whatever path of yoga one is on, one is still considered, according to the Bhakti teachings, also a transcendentalist.
Right.
And but the Bhagavatam is going to largely focus on Krishna. And although we will hear a lot about the different yoga processes as we go through, it's always going to land on understanding something more about Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
And these particular chapters that we're in now, are exceptional because we're at the very beginning of the first canto. So it's giving us an introduction to Krishna at the very beginning. We've kind of talked about this before, how this is like a preview or a foreshadowing of the personality that we're going to be learning a lot about. And so instead of learning about him directly, at this point in the first canto, we're learning about him kind of indirectly. He's not doing a lot in these chapters. We're mostly learning about him through the love of others towards Krishna.
Right. Okay.
So it's kind of like, introducing the concept. I don't know. Like I found that I found all of this that we were just talking about really interesting and fascinating. I hope that people also, like listening to this, will find it not too abstract. Like you were saying, are we going too abstract?
Can I bring it just to conclude that? I
Yep.
heard an example, um, and it basically, the example shows how Bhagavan, this concept of the personality of the absolute, it gives you the full experience of the absolute. So this first, it's just like if you're like, say you're baking a cake or something. So you're in the other room. So first you smell the cake. So that's one characteristic of the cake, right? The smell of it. So
Mm-hmm.
that would be compared to the Brahman understanding. You understand one quality of the absolute, and that's the eternality of it. But then if you go into the kitchen, you not just only smell it, but you see it also. And so it's a greater experience, right? And so that's compared to the Paramama understanding, which is not just eternality, but also consciousness, awareness, knowledge, activity, all those things that come along with so it adds another aspect to the absolute. But when you actually eat the cake, then you get and this is where, this is the real experience, right? Because you can see the cake and you can smell the cake, but until you actually eat it, that's where the real experience comes in. So that's Bhagavan, that's Bhakti, the complete experience of the absolute. And it includes all of the other things, all of the other characteristics, but you get the full experience. So
That's such a great example, because like people will listen. We haven't even, we've just been speaking. We haven't even gotten into the verses yet, but like just listening to these activities of Krishna,
uh-huh.
it's just like eating cake. There's some kind of sweetness to it.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know why the cake tastes good, but I'm just going to keep eating it because it tastes good. So it's kind of like that at the beginning with hearing about Krishna. It's just so far out and it's so sweet. And all we have to do is just be happy with that experience, if we're not getting it intellectually,
Right.
and just keep on tasting the cake, and then eventually, like why it's sweet will start to become more apparent. But that's a great analogy. I like it. Yeah, it's more like the full whole experience.
Yeah, I heard that from one teacher.
So Krishna is a piece of cake. Let's get into some of the sweetness a little bit. I think that it's worth once in a while going into that kind of a tangent, because we do have to. It's demanding, to have somebody stay with this what's being offered in
Yeah.
bhakti.
And personally, you've been talking about, you've been mentioning the activities of Krishna, and like we've been talking about the experience, and you keep mentioning, and I have this um kind of like expectancy growing inside me. It's like, well, when are we going to actually read about the
Yeah,
activities? It
yeah.
sounds great, but when are we going to actually do it?
Let's do it.
Okay, okay.
Okay, text 21. Uh, Krishna approached them. Okay, so now we're all of the everybody is coming out of the city and stuff and coming to greet him, and it's saying here the Krishna approached them and offered due honor and respect to each and every one of the friends, relatives, citizens, and all others who came to receive and welcome him. Perfect reciprocation to all the individual people there. Text number 22. Go for it.
Krishna greeted everyone present by bowing his head, exchanging greetings, embracing, shaking hands, looking and smiling, giving assurances, and awarding benedictions, even to the lowest in rank.
So it's quite personal, eh? You can't, like the personal, you can't do that with an energy
Right,
or a
right,
light. Personal interaction.
right.
And I just wanted to pause on this point, even to the lowest in rank. There's this thing here that uh in the commentary, Prabhupada says living entities are graded differently in terms of the modes of material nature. But actually says in terms of contamination of the modes of material nature. But Krishna is equally affectionate to all his parts and parcels, despite material gradation. So what that means is that on a spiritual platform, we're all equal. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was already stressed, in this chapter so far when, there's the kings and princes and the exalted personalities in the society, people who are looked up to, you could say, and his personal relatives and people who are quite dear to Krishna come out. But there was also a whole little piece about the prostitutes and other members of society that weren't necessarily high ranking. But none of that has any relevance spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so this point is that the 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 different kind of situations the gradation that's described as according to the modes of nature, basically how the modes that we choose to associate with just put us into different fields of activity.
Right, right.
And some of those activities are adored in society, and some of those activities are not adored in society. But according to the modes of nature that we want to associate with, we become attracted to those kinds of activities. But it's not like part of the soul. We can at any time choose to change the kind of modes that we want to become attracted to.
Right, right.
Modes being goodness, passion, or ignorance. If someone's a thief, you could say, like always intruding on other people's peace and happiness, you could say, well, let's just call that someone who's attracted to activities in the mode of ignorance.
Right,
And
right.
if somebody is, interested in always doing good to others and trying to live peacefully and in harmony with their environment, let's just call that, for now, the mode of goodness. And so that places us differently in how we're able to associate with people in our community.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, just to elaborate a little further, it says in the Bhagavad Gita that in ignorance, the activity, it's from the beginning to the end, it's suffering for the personal experience of it. So it's like you're like forced to do something that in the beginning it's suffering, and then in the end it causes suffering also. Whereas in passion, in the beginning it's happiness, but in the end it causes suffering. We can see that our society like has definitely strong influences of passion, because we right now, you know, we live very comfortably, but at the expense of maybe in the future, you know, not living very comfortably. And in goodness, it may be difficult in the beginning, but the result in the end is happiness. So yeah.
Yeah. Those are, I love talking about the modes too. And I think we'll have more opportunities to dig into it, but I think it's important to understand like what the distinctions are in society and why. Like it's not an inequality thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just also was hearing something about this, that in terms of people's different ranks in society, in the Vedic society, everybody had a contribution.
Yeah.
Like even though they were differently situated and they had different material qualifications, some were more intelligent, you know, so many different qualifications. It was mentioned there that everybody's contribution was equally considered, equally
Yes.
and so
Valuable.
even this spiritual principle of us all being equal on the spiritual level, it even came over um, into the realm of just activity in this world, and that it was everybody was seen equally on the platform of that their contribution to society was valuable. No,
Absolutely.
and that the doctor's contribution was no more valuable than the other person, the person who
Mm,
may be, you know, making pots or something.
yeah. And everyone in society had equal access to, well, they had access to the resources they needed. Yeah.
Yes, right, right.
Okay. Well, let's keep going. Then, yep. Then Krishna personally entered the city. So now he's just now entering the city, accompanied by elderly relatives and invalid brahmanas with their wives, all offering benedictions and singing and singing his glories. Others also praised the glories of Krishna. So it's interesting. Like you know, he's accompanied by his elderly relatives. Okay, that's like part of the culture. You know, he's being, you know, escorted by the elders.
Mhm.
But the invalid brahmanas,
Yeah, that's yeah.
you know, like I think it's interesting that there is in Christianity. I don't want to make a too much of a parallel here, but there is this thing about caring for the invalid and caring for the poor is kind of like worked very deeply into the Christian faith and Christian purpose, right?
Mhm.
And I think that is one of the strengths of Christianity. One of the things that does line up well with some of the values or principles that are found in the Vedas as well. You know, the need to take care of the poor and to take care of those who are to not be oblivious, to not,
Right,
you
right.
know, to not just become absorbed in our own satisfaction in life and forget about, you know, the others who are also living in this world, but that actually, if we're not suffering, we have some responsibility towards those who are. I have lots of say. I have lots to say that isn't so great about Christianity too. But I mean, like at least once in a while, it's nice to point out some strengths, right? And
Mhm.
like that's the strength,
Mhm. Mhm.
because that's the image. I had this image of Jesus first because I grew up in. We both grew up in Christianity, right? So we grew
Yeah.
up with this kind of imagery. You know, Jesus surrounded by like lepers or some kind of like, you know, those impoverished, and it's a strong message of that in Christianity. At least the message is very good. And it's also present in the Vedic teachings that we cannot live oblivious to the suffering of others in the world. There's some duty on our part to take care of people,
Mhm. Mhm.
and Krishna is modeling that even now.
Um, yeah, and also there's another aspect to it that it's mentioned a little bit in the commentary here, and that I was hearing about is that like the duty of the, so we're talking about the elderly relatives and the Brahmins.
Mm-hmm.
So their contribution to society, the Brahmins and the elderly relatives, when people got old, and Brahmins for their whole life, that was their duty, but was to contribute guidance and wisdom. The elderly were, because they've gone through life, they've experienced things, they know, they've applied, they know what works and they know how to apply it. And so they would give guidance. And the Brahmanas' lives were dedicated to studying, just studying the spiritual, spiritual for the spiritual and material welfare of the society. And so they were always giving guidance to the leaders. Um,
They weren't
and
making a lot
so,
of money, right?
yeah, and that's also mentioned here in this commentary,
Yeah.
that they would go to the kings, not to have, he says here, Prabhupada says here, not to have a like a lavish retirement or anything like that, but because they could offer wisdom and guidance to the kings, to the leaders of society, and in return they would be maintained for their lives. And so there is actually the culture, and we see here when Krishna is entering, the culture is that the kings or the leaders of society, wherever they would go, the Brahmanas would always go in front of them. And this was to symbolize that they were always guided by wisdom. They
Ah,
were
cool.
guided and specifically guided by the Vedic, literatures.
Mm-hmm.
And so that culture was there, and it came out also in how they like just conducted their activities, in how they, entered somewhere, or just to show that the leaders were not independent people. They didn't just make decisions based on how they felt. Their decisions were based on the wisdom coming from the
Mm-hmm.
Brahmanas, which were coming from the authority of the Vedas.
Some visible accountability.
Yeah,
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 and I like having the brahmanas there. That's really cool.
yeah.
And then people also get to see the relationship between the brahmanas and the leaders, and to see, you know, it would also inspire the people
Mhm,
that
mhm.
the leaders can be followed because they're following the brahmanas.
Right, right,
Yeah,
right.
interesting. Well, we're kind of running out of time, but like, why don't we read a few more, because we spoke about Krishna as, as being so sweet and whatnot, and the first chunk we didn't get much into the chapter. Let's keep on going on some verses just for another minute or two.
Okay. So this is 24. When Krishna passed over the public roads, all the ladies from the respectable families of Dwarka went up to the roofs of their palaces just to have a look at Krishna. They considered this to be the greatest festival. I'm sorry, I was mentioning this before, but
Yeah.
I just have this like um this idea of like, in the modern day you have some personalities where people, they like go and see them just to see them, like, it was in the 60s, it was the Beatles. Now it's like maybe like, people like, I don't know, Taylor Swift or something like that. People like, they rush out to see these people, and just to see them, it seems to be like such a just like completes their lives or something like that. I personally, I haven't like really experienced that, but I can see that people have this, this is happening with Krishna. And the thing about Krishna is that, these people are famous, or they may be beautiful, or they may be talented, but the understanding of Krishna, or Bhagavan, as we were talking about before, is the understanding is that Bhagavan actually literally means the person who has unlimited beauty, unlimited fame, the source of these things, actually the source of the fame. So whatever we see in this world that people have, like fame or beauty or whatever, it's just borrowed from
Mm-hmm.
Krishna. But he's
Mm-hmm.
actually the reservoir of all of these things. So you can understand, if you see how it even happens in this world with people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you can understand with Krishna that it's a whole, it's the same type of experience, but on a whole another level, because he's got these beauty and fame and opulence in unlimited quantity.
Mm. I was having a flashback of when I was living in the ashram in the early 2000s. I was spending some time in Los Angeles in the ashram and there, and I just happened to be on Hollywood Boulevard um, that day when Ozzy Osbourne had his
Uh,
they have these like on the
oh, put
sidewalk, they've got these stars put in the
yeah,
sidewalk.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I
yeah.
was there on that day, just randomly, just worked out like that. And he was there was a helicopter. I think he was in the helicopter, and the streets were just packed with people who had come to see him, just like you're saying, come to see the fame. Right? It was quite a ghastly scene, actually. They were interesting people to look
Yeah,
at,
yeah, yeah. I
but
bet.
it was some kind of manifestation of that fame, a little glimmer of it, right?
Right.
He appears and everybody wants to go there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly.
just
And
it's just like a flash though compared to the source.
well, and that's what we're hearing about. We may not
Yeah.
have, that's the thing, is like we may not have experience of it, but that's what Krishna says in the Gita, that these things that you're seeing in this world, like the fame or and that we're attracted to, it's just a spark of what I personally like have.
Uh-huh.
So this is the thing, is like I'm just thinking with kirtan is described, like
Mm.
that the Krishna's name and the personality are actually on the spiritual level. There's the same. And so we actually are starting to have a glimmer of that experience when we are chanting. And we can fully have it at some point, but that's like kind of these are the experiences that are, available
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
through chanting.
Gradually gets more and more.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. I think we're at about an hour, but let's just read one or two more.
Okay. Okay.
Where were we? You just read text 24, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, the inhabitants of Dwarka were regularly accustomed to look upon the reservoir of all beauty, the infallible Krishna, yet they were never satiated.
Hmm.
They were accustomed because usually he stayed there, right?
Right. Right.
And even though they had this opportunity, they were never completely. They never got it. It's like, oh, okay, I've seen him. Not like that. It was like complete. It's more satisfying by the moment.
Yeah. And that's actually a good point, because our material experience with things is that it does have a satiation point. It's like you're mentioning about music. I really like music, and I
Mm-hmm.
remember when I was in like high school, like I'd really get into something, some particular, band and some particular maybe songs, and I'd listen to them like over and over. But at some point, whatever it was that was in there that was attractive, it reaches a satiation point, and then you go on to something else.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
find something. But so this is the material experience, but on the spiritual experience, is that it doesn't have that satiation point. The experience becomes deeper and richer. And you can definitely see that with um, spiritual practitioners. Like we know that people who have been, say, chanting for like years and years and years, and you can see that they're not satiated,
Right.
and that actually their experience is more and more rich.
Yeah.
Usually materially, like the experience is like good, it's like the best at the beginning, and then you're trying to get that experience again,
Yeah.
and then it kind of like, oh well, at some point you give up. but
Yeah. Right.
but the spiritual experience, it becomes more and more rich and deep and satisfying. And so
That's a great
it's
point. Like Krishna, he's so incredibly attractive, and and it doesn't wane. That what to speak of his personal form, even chanting the different names. Like when we chant the mantra, say when we chant, like when we chant in kirtan, how long can we chant the Maha Mantra for example, when we're chanting Hare Krishna with the harmonium? And like, at some point, are we going to think, well, I've done that? Like I don't,
Right.
what to speak of on beads, Java beads, like you're saying, people who have been doing it year after year after year. And it's only like at the beginning, at least, associating with the sound vibration of Krishna. What
Right.
to
Right.
speak of his fully manifested form? How potent that must be. If the name, of course, the name is described as being not different, which is another topic. Anyway, what do you think, Riyad? Do we?
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's well, that's the thing is that
We don't
I
want to
think
stop.
I know we're having a direct experience of it's like as you get into it, becomes more and more rich, and so it's like, well, we could keep going, but
Yeah, yeah.
no, it's good. It's good.
All right.
It's
Thanks
good
for
because this text here is telling us that we'll never be satiated. So
no sense in trying, right? Right, right. Which is good because it's unlimited
yeah.
future and present happiness. All right. Thanks, Brihat. That was really great. It was a very interesting discussion. Glad we did that. Look
Thank you.
forward to doing it next week. See you then.
Thank you. Thank you.